Hello everyone, welcome to this sixth session of the Higher Education Access course. I'm just letting everyone in. You will notice that we have a guest joining today's session. We've got our Homerton College Arts Admissions Tutor, Dr. Sandy Mill. Is that how you'd like to be introduced?
I'm not a doctor yet, unfortunately. Getting there gradually.
Almost doctor.
Getting there.
Who has done a huge amount of interviews here at Cambridge. So he'll be able to answer all of your specific questions about what it's actually like to be interviewed at Cambridge. We're going to focus this session on how to ace a Cambridge Arts and Humanities interview. It will be mainly led by me, but then there'll be plenty of time to ask your questions to Sandy at the end, but maybe also in our sample questions as well. So just a reminder that if you have any questions throughout this session, we're using Slido to do that. So go to slido.com and put in the code Homerton, and you can put any questions or comments in there. And there's a reminder of this on every single slide, so you'll be able to remember that. This is just to show you where we are in the programme. We are now on the sixth session. You've learned a lot about choosing courses and colleges, financing university, writing your personal statement. You got to meet some Cambridge students. You learned about assessments in the last session, and now we're getting started on interviews. There might be some of you today who have come specifically. I'm assuming most of you will have come because you are thinking of an arts or humanities subject. But if you're here and you're not thinking of one of those, then it's probably still really helpful because there's a lot of general information. But there will be a specific STEM one, which you might prefer if you are more interested in sciences or maths. How this session is going to run is that I'll give you some basic facts about interviews. Then I'll ask you quite a lot of questions. So there's going to be some myth busting about interviews. I'll then give you some tips on how to prepare for your interviews, and then we will have some sample questions that we'll be able to go through together with some input as well from our admissions tutor here, who will give you maybe some insight on what an interviewer would be thinking. And finally, lots of time for you to ask any questions that you have. So just some basic facts about our interviews here at Cambridge. They happen in the first 2 weeks of December of the year that you have applied. How many? Usually 1 to 3 interviews. It will depend on the college, but for instance at Homerton last year we gave pretty much everyone 2 interviews, and that was just to so that everyone had 2 opportunities to shine, just in case one didn't go well. They last between 20 and 25 minutes. There's usually 2 interviewers in each. They could be online or in person, and they are an academic conversation relating to your subject. Did you want to say something, Sandy? Oh, we can't hear you.
How many Cambridge academics does it take to work out how to use Microsoft Teams? Anyway, it's worth noting that overall you'll have about 45 minutes of interview time. So whether you have a single interview, which some colleges do, or some subjects do, Homerton or architecture interviews, for example, will take that format, you'd have a longer interview. So you've got pretty much the same amount of interview time whether you do 2 or 1. It's just whatever suits the college or the subject best that we choose.
Yeah, thank you. And I've also put 1 to 3 just so that people don't sort of panic if they get 3 or if they get 1, just because it can vary. And that's also the case. This is also for Oxford as well. So overall, Cambridge and Oxford, you might get somewhere between 1 and 3. General interview myth busting. So this is the time when you open up Slido. Hopefully you can do that on the same device and put in the code Homerton. What percentage of UK students that apply to Cambridge do you think are invited to interview on average?
I think I know this one. Do I get to answer or not? We should probably leave it to that.
Somebody says Somebody says 80%. I'm just waiting for some more responses.
Not going to give it away.
0%. That might be a mistake. I don't know.
70%. I will safely say it is more than 0.
Somebody says 70%. Somebody says 50, 16. There's quite a broad range. So the answer that I've got, and Sandy, let me know if I'm wrong, approximately 70% of students that apply from the UK are invited to interview.
So this does vary a little bit between subjects, as Lindsay
said,
and actually in the arts and humanities, actually it'll be higher than that percentage normally. We use our pre-interview assessments where we have them to deselect students, because that's a nice consistent measure. We can see how well every student has stacked up by the same metric. And the only arts, humanities and social science subject that has one of those is law. So actually, while that figure of 70% may look pretty decent, actually your odds are actually even higher in most arts subjects of getting through to an
interview. Okay, and this involves more than, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, and it's worth noting that if we bring you through to interview, you've got a great shot at a place. We wouldn't be wasting your time, your energy, our time and our energy if you didn't have a realistic shot at getting a place at Cambridge. So if you get through to that stage, it's a huge, huge thing. You should congratulate yourself for it. But it also really does show the competition is so strong, because we have about 80% in the arts and humanities of our applicants getting through to interview. Sorry, Lindsay.
That's fine, thank you. And it involves more than 20,000 interviews in each admissions round. So obviously we're doing this for you, also for us, because our academics here are really excited to meet the new students that they're going to be teaching. But it's a lot of time, and we wouldn't be doing that if we didn't really want to be meeting you. Why do we interview? Again, for you to answer that question, I'll wait for some responses to come in. Why do you think that we interview candidates? Don't have any responses yet. Might be a bit of a longer one to type, so I'll just wait a bit.
Yeah, we wouldn't be putting ourselves or you through it if there wasn't very good reason to do so.
Still no responses. I don't know if anyone's typing, but in the interest of time, I'll probably move on. So these are some reasons why we, there are some responses. There's to deselect people who wouldn't get in despite performing very well. Yes, although that's quite a bit of a negative focus on it. It's more to select, but I suppose you're right, it is another filter. Find out a candidate's in-depth or abstract understanding. Yes. So I've got some things here to gain insight into your thought processes, and that sort of links to what one of you said about your understanding. See whether you fit the Cambridge teaching methods, because our interviews are a lot like our supervisions that I've already spoken to you about in a previous session, our really small group teaching. To see you as people rather than a set of data, because we find that grades and a personal statement don't actually tell us all that much about a person. And to see how you deal with academic challenges and new information, which you'll have to be doing all the time at university. There's a question that's come in, but I think we'll leave that to later. It's
worth noting what isn't in there, especially for the arts and humanities and social sciences, is seeing how much you know. Different people have learned different things. We're not expecting certain knowledge when it comes down to the interviews. Apologies, that's my phone going off in the background. I'll put that on silent in a second. But what we're really looking for is how you think, how you deal with new information. What is your potential and how well are you going to work within our systems of learning? It's not about knowledge.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So I've spoken about why we interview and why we find it helpful, but do you think there are any benefits for you in the interview process? Is it all bad for you, or are there some advantages for you? That's another question for you to answer on the Slido. So I'll just wait. I think because it can take a while for your responses to come through, I will go forward and then I'll take your responses as we get to see if the Cambridge teaching style suits us. It allows us to have an in-depth talk about a subject that you love. Yeah, some really good points, and I think they're both on my next slide. So to experience the style of teaching at Cambridge, I have that down here. If you find that you hate your interview, you may not like talking out loud about your subject every single week at Cambridge. It doesn't mean that it will be exactly the same. Obviously, you're going to be nervous in your interview and less nervous when you're already at Cambridge, but it does give you a really good sense of what that might be like. You get to build on information that you have provided in the rest of your application. You get to show the interviewers that you can use existing knowledge to tackle unfamiliar questions, which is hard to prove in your personal statement. And you get to have an academic conversation with an expert in your chosen area of study. And that links to what the second comment was about, that in-depth talk about a subject that you love. So ultimately, it is a really good opportunity for you, regardless of the outcome. I've got some true or false questions next, which should be a bit easier for you to type in. The first one is, interviews are full of traps. True or false? Somebody says false. Somebody else says false. You are right. It's false. Of course, the interview is an academic conversation about topics that relate to your subject and your interests. Interviewers absolutely don't want to trick you. They want you to do well. And they're also experts at interviewing, so they really know how to challenge you in a way that allows you to show your strengths. Go ahead, Sandy.
Just to say, I want to double down on that point. Even if you have trouble believing that, rationally, it's not in our interest to try and trap you. We want to see you at your very best, because that's the only way we get to see your full potential, what you're actually capable of. If we were trying to do little tricks and things, we wouldn't be actually able to get a good gauge on that. We wouldn't be able to see who is going to learn best within our systems of teaching. So it's in no one's best interest. If we ask you a question, we really do mean it. Sometimes it's simpler than you might think, but we really do just want you to say the simple response to start off with. But trapping you is not in our interest whatsoever. It's certainly not new.
Yeah, thank you for reiterating that, because I think a lot of people do think that sometimes about Cambridge interviews. Next one, you need to know everything about your subject to succeed in your interview. True or false? I think Sandy's given you a bit of a hint on this one from what he said earlier. False, false.
Whoops.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So you're not expected to know everything. No one knows everything about their subject. Even people who have spent years studying their subject don't know everything. That's why they're still studying them. Interviews aren't about knowing everything. They're about showing how you can use knowledge that you have in new ways. Trust your ability. You are being interviewed because they genuinely think that you have a chance to get in. And don't worry as well if you need to ask questions, if you want clarification during your interview because you're not quite sure about something that they've asked you about. The next one is, you need to change yourself to do well in your interview. True or false? I will just wait for some responses to this one. Do you think you have to change yourself? False. There's a bit of a pattern in this, but yes, that one is also false. We want to see and talk to you. That's why we're interviewing you. We don't want to see anybody else. We don't want you to put on a particular persona. We don't want you to worry about your appearance or your background or how you speak or how you approach questions and conversations. We just want to hear how interested you are in your subject. So just be yourself. Obviously, we know interviewers know that you are going to be a bit nervous. They're expecting that. And also, I guess you do need to sort of prepare for the fact that you're going to be in an interview, so maybe a little bit more formal than a conversation with friends. But ultimately, it is you do need to just be yourself. Next one is, you have to memorize lots of stuff to say during your interview to sound intelligent. True or false? No, but you shouldn't lie. False. Yes, that one is also false. So even if someone has suggested that you bring up something you've read or that you've learned, regardless of whether it comes up naturally, please don't do that. Interviews are much more natural than that. They really just want to see how you think.
But I guess one of my pet hates in interviews when people are just trying to jam in stuff that they already know and they really want to talk about, and not listening and responding and coming up with what we're asking them. So that's a key thing.
Yeah, so it's really important to be listening to the interviewer and aware of what they're actually asking you rather than just focusing on what you're trying to fit in. I've got a little bit more information here on how to prepare for your interviews before we go on to the sort of nitty-gritty of what they might include in an arts or humanities interview and what that might look like. So there's 3 main tips on how to prepare. The first one is supercurricular engagement. I've already spoken about this when I talked about writing your personal statement. It's really good to be doing this in general for your applications to university, but it will also help you in your interview. This means showing interest in your subject outside school, whether that is reading a book, reading an article, listening to a podcast, watching a YouTube video, taking part in a competition, keeping up with the news in your subject. And I've also got some suggestions here of things that you can do, which we've got a resources section on our website where you can find supercurriculars in lots of different subjects. We've also got our essay and design programs that we're running here at Homerton, which are really good programs to demonstrate that supercurricular engagement, but there's plenty more out there as well. And what's really important in terms of that engagement is to be critical and analytical. So make sure that you are reflecting on what you're doing and you're thinking about what you're gaining from it, that you're forming an opinion on what you're reading, maybe linking it to other things that you know, thinking about how it relates to your subject, because all of this thinking will help you when you come to your interview. The second tip to prepare for your interviews is to know your application well. And this is more important probably in an arts and humanities interview than in a science one. Reread everything that you have sent in. Make sure you're very aware of what's in your personal statement, in your additional Cambridge specific personal statement, and any written work that you've sent in as well. Think critically about any arguments that you've made. Make sure you're comfortable talking about those things because you might well get asked about them, and it wouldn't look good if you didn't quite remember what they were about. And also stay familiar with the topics that you've said that you have already covered in school. So in your My Cambridge application, that supplementary questionnaire, you are going to be putting in what topics you've already covered. Make sure that you are aware of those as well. Or for instance, for English, I think they ask you books that you've read recently. So anything you mention, be aware that you could get asked about that, and you would be expected to have a clear, to be able to talk about those. And finally, practice talking out loud about your academic interests. So even if it sounds really stupid, talk out loud to yourself, ask yourself questions about your personal statement or topics you've done in school or a supercurricular activity. Try and think about how you might answer something. If you're lucky and someone will listen to you, then you can also try with a friend or a family member or a staff member at school. Ask them if they can say, for instance, can I explain this concept to you? Or can you choose a random fact from this textbook and ask me what I think about it? Can you look at my personal statement and ask me a question? If you have somebody who can do that, that's great, but it's also quite easy to do that yourself. Just by sort of reading through your personal statement, thinking about what questions you might get, and just trying to talk out loud about those, because it's not always very natural to do that. So it's really good to feel comfortable doing that when you come to your interview. And in the interview, this sort of reiterates what Sandy said a few minutes ago, but listen carefully to the questions that you are being asked. Explain your thinking out loud and clearly. Don't worry if you get things wrong, just keep trying and keep talking to your interviewers. Remember that interview questions are often your interviewer introducing an idea for you to discuss together, and there mostly isn't a right or wrong answer, especially in the arts and humanities. And also breathe and enjoy the process, because it's not actually that long and it is a really good experience. We're now going to move on to our sample questions, where you're going to be able to have a try of what it might be like to be in a Cambridge interview. So the first, oh no, actually I had a bit more information for you. What could an arts interview involve? These are some things that you might get in an interview, and we're going to have a look at some of these. You might get to discuss a piece of reading that they have asked you to look at beforehand. That could be an image, it could be a text. And if so, your college will let you know about this, and they'll let you know exactly how to access it. So don't worry about that. You might get an unseen source or material or concept that is presented to you in the interview. And the reason we do that is because it puts everyone, it sort of levels the playing field, because everyone, usually it's a material that no one has seen before. It allows us to see how different applicants approach the same source, and it also allows you to challenge yourself and to see how far your thinking can go. Another thing you might get is more of an open-ended question about your subject. Typically doesn't have a right or wrong answer, it will just start a conversation. And another thing you might get is questions about your personal statement, which are not destined. The aim of those is not for you to just repeat what's in there, but it's to sort of see how far you can go with those ideas that you've mentioned. The first one that we're going to have a look at is one based on a text that you would have to read beforehand. You typically wouldn't be given a lot of reading to do in an interview. You'd probably be given this beforehand, and you would probably get about 10 minutes to look at something like this. So you might have actually seen these poems already, but they would definitely usually in your interview be things that you would not have engaged with. I actually picked these because I studied them at university, but I'm aware that some of these might be in some parts of the curriculum, so that would not normally be the case. I've put some, before I let you actually read these and have a think about them, I've put some questions here. You wouldn't normally get questions, you might get a few questions, but it would probably just be kind of given to you. It might say compare these, but these questions might be some that you are asked in the interview, so that's why I've put them there for you to have a think about. What do these have in common? How are they different? Can you infer anything about the authors? So you can see that I've hidden the names of the authors and the dates as well of these poems from how they are written. What kinds of emotions are expressed? Do they remind you of anything that you have read before? And these questions would sort of spur a conversation about this topic. So I'm now going to give you a bit of time, a few minutes, to have a read and comment in the on Slido any of these questions or thoughts that you have about these. Feel free to type in any thoughts or impressions. You don't have to be specifically answering those questions. Somebody says they are both about identity. Yes, that is a good point.
So one of the things we might do when we're looking at these within the interviews, I might start with some very simple questions, such as what do you think the themes of these poems are, or what they have in common? The idea of this is not to trick you, but what I want to do is get an idea of your basic comprehension skills with the piece, and also to get your confidence going. Often, if you've been given something to look at beforehand, we'll deal with that first within the interview while it's still fresh in your memory, so you're not getting distracted by some other questions we're asking, and then we're having to pull you back into your focus on that. But starting with very simple questions, it's not a trick. It's just to help you get warmed up, and then we're going to be diving into some of these comparisons between these two maybe, or some of your deeper thoughts regarding the themes or the things that you're looking at. So don't be afraid of those early questions. They really are as easy as they sound.
Thanks. That's really helpful, because I think the ones I've put there are definitely further questions that you might get later down the line. I've got some comments here. Anger. They both express how the authors feel unrepresented in their society. Yes. And just to say, and I'm sure Sandy will echo me on this, the comments you've made really, really good. What they'd probably do is try and push that further. So if you say something like that, they're really interested, because that person who's interviewing you probably has is interested in everything that relates to English. They want to know what more you have to say, so they'll probably push you to think further.
For example, with this one, if you're saying that, okay, they're about anger, is it the same type of anger? Because anger is quite a broad-ranging emotion. How are they expressing this anger? Are they doing it in similar ways, in different ways? And most importantly, the most important question in any arts and humanities interviews, why? Why do you think they're expressing it in such different ways? If you go for the different in that response, why do you think they've chosen the exact words they have that express that anger? I might ask you to point out a couple of words that, if you said, oh, this expresses anger, find out a couple of phrases in the text that demonstrate that for me, showing me those skills that you're able to refer back to the text and use that to help justify your answer. And we'll be getting in deep into the ways in which they've expressed the thing that you've said. Now, for another interviewee, maybe they say sadness. Well, you know what? We go down that route as well. There's very few right or wrong answers when it comes down to interviews in the arts and humanities, and we'd want to explore that. Or why have you gone for sadness? Again, similar sorts of questions. Can you pick out some of the parts of the text that show that? Are they expressing that in the same or different ways? And those answers could be just as strong as one another. It doesn't matter which route you're taking. What matters is that you're thinking in depth, you're responding to the things that we've asked you, and the prompts that we're giving, and that you're really trying to get that depth of understanding out of it. And that really is key. People who just give a short answer and stop, and we have to really push to try and dig in deep, that's trickier. What we want these people to go as deep as they can do, ask those why questions of themselves and their ideas, and really explore in full depth what we're presenting you with.
Yeah. And I guess what that will show is your interest as well. Ultimately, if you really do want to study English and you want to spend 3 years of your life reading lots of texts in depth, then it's going to show here because you'll want to do it. So ultimately, that's what we're really looking at. It's not to trick you. I've got some more comments. I'm just going to read the other things. They use different language styles and dialects to display the poet's differences. Yes.
Brilliant. Why? What's different about these? What types of language? Why would they have picked these different styles? I might get a little bit flashy and ask you to think about the audience. Or why have they chosen to present this type of language to their audience? What's the author's potential intention behind that? Maybe you give me an idea of what you think. And then maybe I respond with, well, how about this instead? Not because I necessarily believe it or think you're wrong. I want to see how you can back up your views or be flexible and change if you think there are good reasons too. Again, trying to find that extra depth wherever we can.
Yeah, thank you. There's some more. How sense of self is influenced by education systems and curriculum, specifically here in the context of, I never know how to pronounce this word, ethnocentrism.
Yep, no, you got it.
And the first expresses frustration by talking about things taken away, whilst the other shows it by talking about how society doesn't relate to them at all. So some comparison there as well. That's really, really good. And none of these would be wrong. Everything that you've suggested would be a really good starting point. They would just want to see how far you can get with that. And that also shows you that every interview is a little bit different, because even if we show this same material, it will go down a different route with different people. For the person who's just talked about education systems, that would be a really big point here. And you might even get these texts in a more of an education focused interview. But you're absolutely right that it's a lot about education, and you might go down a route that's really focused on that. Whereas others might have talked more about frustration and anger and how that can be reflected in poetry. So there are so many routes you could go down. There's no one that is wrong. And hopefully this has given you a good sense of that. I think, unless you want to add anything, Sandy, I think we can.
I think it's great.
Leave it with this one. You would have more time to reflect on this, but you've given some really good thoughts. So thank you for that. The next one is a sample of more of an open-ended question that you might get, which doesn't have a pre-reading element to it. It's a sample question that you might get for law. Would it be wrong for someone to go through a red light in the middle of the night when there is no one around?
See, I see a question like that, and immediately there's about 4, 5, 6 routes I could think of taking through this question. There are a couple of very key words in here as well, which are quite open-ended. Give you a little clue there. So have a see how you might think about some of those.
So feel free to put in the Slido any thoughts you have, how you might try and approach this question. And if you did struggle with it, the interviewer would probably ask you it again, maybe in a different way, try and help you. They wouldn't just sort of leave you there with that question.
I would say as well, don't try to get too clever with it. You might say, oh, go through a red light, you know, just like someone's left a red light on the floor, like a little beam that passes up and lights up a church or something like that. No, it's obvious colloquially we mean a red traffic light in this sense. So don't try and get too smart with it. Because there's a couple of other words that have got a bit of flex that you could play with.
I've got a few responses. Yes, because it breaks. Yes, because it breaks the law. However, it depends on an individual's perception of wrong and right, as wrong may be thought of as illegal rather than morally wrong. Do you want me to read them all and then?
Let's take that one for a start. Okay. I love the focus on the word wrong here. Illegal versus moral and morally wrong. We could go down a route about talking, well, is it ever justified to break a law, for example? Or we could, really focus in on the sort of illegality aspect of it. So yeah, absolutely, that's a great direction to take. Let's go for another one.
No, because it is still the law which is there for safety reasons. Seen as it is night, there may be a pedestrian around that you might not have noticed.
So does that mean no, it wouldn't? That seems to imply that it would be wrong. But you started off with a no. But I think, and this is the thing, if something like that happened in an interview, what I would do is I'd just confirm whether or not you think, oh, so it would be wrong then, because you're saying it would be illegal and your reasoning says why. And then we go, yep, and then we'd be all fine. Don't feel worried or embarrassed if something like that happens. It's a really, really nice example of that right there, because the reasoning is nice and sound. Lovely. My first thought with this one was the someone. What if they're an ambulance driver?
Yeah, or a pregnant woman being taken to the hospital.
Yeah. And I might come up with a counter example like that to then sort of start playing around. Well, why is it justified that the ambulance driver can race to the red light, but me in my little, Hyundai i10, I can't? Yeah, that's a really interesting route to go down. Why is it trespassing if someone else comes onto my property, but the postman's allowed to come and put the letters through my letterbox? So, all of these sorts of things, we can come up with little counter examples to test the law in this case and see why there are little differences for different folks.
There's another response. Yes, if we begin to allow illegal things simply because no one is around, a sense of morality and doing what is right is lost.
But how does it matter? Yeah, how would you enforce that? How could you tell if someone has committed an offence if there is no one else around? Does that make a difference? I might argue that the law is an entity that is designed to be used and factored socially. If there's no one else around to do it, does it matter? I mean, morally, absolutely. And probably should. You can come up with some interesting counter arguments about that.
There's another one. Depends on the definition of wrong. Legally, it is. However, it's a bit of a Schrodinger's cat situation morally, as it wouldn't be known by anyone else except you.
So this is exactly what we've just said. I might then ask you, okay, how would you define wrong in this sense? What would be an interesting way of looking at this? Getting you to think through that. I think you've highlighted a really good point there. Now I want to dig deep and see how in-depth you can go with this.
There's another one. It also brings about the question as to why the person needs to pass the red light instead of waiting and abiding by the law. Perhaps selfishness, impatience?
No, good. I'm getting into sort of the need of the individual versus the letter of the law. Can be a really fruitful set of things. Again, contrasting that with the, rushing a pregnant lady to hospital, or not just pregnant, but giving birth lady to hospital. Is there a difference between those two cases, or actually should I be stopping when I have, somebody who is halfway through giving birth in my backseat?
The need to define the word wrong and whether that statement is fully true, or if the person believes they are, i.e. has no adverse effect if the words are completely true.
We could go down a heavy philosophical route with that, and I'm not going to right now. We could get into the definition of truth and get in a law interview. I wouldn't do that. If it was a philosophy interview and we were doing an ethical question like this, I might be tempted. But yeah, absolutely, great points.
Regardless of the fact it's legally wrong, the concept of law is put in place to protect citizens, and personal judgment can override that in occasions.
But then where do we put the limits on that? How do we say whether or not someone has broken a law justly or correctly and therefore shouldn't be sensitive to punishment or not? Or are there any cases where actually breaking a law is the right thing to do? We can get about the idea of just or unjust laws, or whether or not it's ever justified to break a law.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, is there? No, there's no more coming in at the moment.
Okay.
Oh, there is. We aren't thinking deep enough. What actually is the colour red? It's subjective, as people may not associate red with stop.
So, interesting one. That might be getting a little bit into the question of shifting the question touch. However, we could look at examples with that, colourblind individuals, but then we're talking about aspects of the law here that, ignorance is not an excuse in terms of breaking the law. If I go and cross the street in the USA, as I might in the UK, not at a crossing, I can still legally be charged with jaywalking, even though I might claim that I just didn't know, and where I'm from, that law didn't actually apply. So we could get into discussion about why that might be the case. Why would it be that actually, lacking knowledge of the law is not seen as an excuse in the eyes of the law within a country? But yeah, I wouldn't start defining red unless I was really in a philosophical interview and going down a very deep rabbit hole on that one.
So
keeps the spirit of the question.
So as you can see, there isn't too much of a right or wrong answer to this. It's definitely more of a starting point to get you thinking about law, the nature of laws, why we choose to have laws, and all of that kind of thinking process. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, Sandy, about this particular question or questions like this.
No, I think this is, again, keeps the spirit of the question. I know we can have a little bit of fun with this in this sort of session. Really focus in. Don't be afraid to define some of these key terms as you see fit, or focus on them when you realise that they really are the crux of what we're looking at. And good examples, back up your points with examples. Really, really helpful.
Yeah. Something actually I wanted to add is quite a few of you immediately went for yes or no. It's absolutely fine not to go for yes or no, and to say, actually, if we look at it this way, I would say maybe this. But if I look at it this other way, I'd say maybe that. And then you're already demonstrating that you can see multiple perspectives. You're almost anticipating what they're going to do, which is probably get you to think about the other options.
That being said, don't hedge if you are being asked for a response directly. If we want you to actually come down on one side or another, please do, come down on one side or another. You can change your mind later. You're not stuck in that position forever. If you change your mind for good reasons, you explain why you've changed your mind, blooming brilliant. If you stick to the same position because you've got good reasons, equally good. But just hedging your bets and trying to say, well, some people think this and some people think that, doesn't really work, because at university, you're going to be arguing for a professor. You're going to be coming down on one side. As an academic, you're going to be presenting your ideas. And yes, someone else might disagree with you and you might disagree with them. But to be honest, that's means that you're all writing papers and everyone stays in nice, gainful employment for the next however many years while you argue that point out. We want you to have some confidence in your views and to be able to put them forward. I'm not sure. It's A-okay. Tell me why you're not sure. If you've got an opinion, go for it. Be confident in that and give us good reasons for it, whatever that opinion is. I also don't mind if you disagree with me. That's A-okay. I'm not judging you based on that opinion. I'm judging you based on how you argue for it and how you go for it. Your opinion might be the exact opposite of mine. I know in law interviews, some people who've been given a case and asked to come down on a judgment on it and have got the answer 100% wrong in terms of UK law. And they've still gotten places because their reasoning was good. They explained why they thought that they did, why this was the case in this instance. And then actually, while it wasn't legally correct in the UK, the interviewers have been impressed enough with their thinking skills, their ability to talk through their ideas and work within the Cambridge supervision style of teaching, discussion and dialogue, listening to the interviewer and picking up on the hints they've given, that they absolutely deserve their place and have done fantastic work at Cambridge. So yeah, don't be afraid to go for your opinions or to say I don't know, but give good reasons all the time, please.
Thank you. And there's a final comment here, a bit far-reaching, but conceptually the law is put into place by people, and who is to say their perception is right or wrong, of right or wrong, is better than ours, morally though?
So I might just go, well, in which case, why should we follow any laws? What's the what's the point of law at that point? We could go into a big sort of overall discussion on that, and why that might lead to potential anarchy and why that might not be desirable.
Thank you. I think we will move on to the final example, but if you have any other questions in the meantime, do put them in. I know that there's two that we will answer at the end already, but you can put in any others in there. The final one I've got is, so we've done one that's more open-ended, one that's more with a pre-reading. This one is a question based on a personal statement. So we've got a history personal statement here. I've highlighted a piece that sort of, when the interviewer was reading this, in this hypothetical situation, the interviewer's reading your personal statement, they found something that they think, that's interesting, I want to ask them a question about that. And what I've put here is the opening question that they might ask you, and then I've suggested some follow-up questions that they might have up their sleeve, that they might have written down, but they might not come to those. They'll sort of decide where the conversation goes.
The key thing that people often kind of do badly when answering personal statement questions is launching into something they've pre-prepared and being adamant they've got to jam all that stuff in. I really want you to be listening to the questions that I'm asking and responding to those directly. It's okay to take a moment and have a think. It's okay to reflect or ask if you need a little bit of help or part of the question being repeated. That's great. That's the sign of a teachable student. But if you're just going off on a tangent that doesn't quite hit what we've asked immediately because you want to say something different, no. We're asking you those questions for a reason. We want you to explore those things. So that's one of the key ways I find in which people often falter when it comes down to personal statement questions. Listen carefully, respond to exactly what the interviewer is asking at all times through the interview, but certainly especially in these sorts of questions, even if it's going into routes or places that you're less confident with or haven't thought of. That's actually part of what we're trying to do, is get you thinking on your feet into the unfamiliar. But we might start with a personal statement to start you off on some more solid ground, build a little confidence before we really start digging deep.
Yeah, so I think this sort of represents that in a way, because in this bit, so the bit of the personal statement that I've highlighted is, as my view of historical figures as idealistic heroes waned, so did my belief in source material as infallible. My interest in finding the real story behind events created my interest in the subject of history. So the interviewer here was really interested in that idea of sources as maybe as being infallible and perfect. If in an ideal world a perfect source could exist, what would it look like? Do perfect sources exist? So as Sandy said, here they're not asking you to repeat your thought process when you wrote this personal statement and all of the other stuff that's come before and everything you've thought about when you were writing this. They're asking you to think a little bit further and differently, to reflect on something that you've already thought about a little bit, but to push beyond that. Do feel free to put your thoughts on this as well if you want to reflect on it. And I've put more follow-up questions. Is there such a thing as an objective fact? They might, for instance, tell you that there's a quote, study the historian before you study the facts. Do you have any thoughts on this? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? What's the relationship between history and the truth? What is truth in history? And then they might go to, what is the role of the historian then? And what is, isn't the role of the historian to uncover past truths? Is a truth, how do you define a truth? Does it have to be true for numerous people? Does it have to be true for a whole nation? Does it have to be true for a defined period of time? And then they'd probably, you could even open up to wider debate. Is there ever objectivity in history? If there isn't, then what are we trying to do as historians? What is the point of history? And you can see that a bit like that previous question about law, ultimately they're using a particular question, but what they're really getting you to do is reflect on the nature of that subject and sort of wider debates. You would never be asked a series of questions like this in the way that it's written here. They would never sort of quick fire all of these. I've put lots here just to think things for you to show you what it might look like as the conversation goes on. But they'd obviously actually have that conversation with you and see where it goes before they ask you the following question.
In terms of that, we try to be very natural with it. So I would probably have the first question prepared here, having read through the statement. I know that's what I want to ask about this statement, but then we really are responding to what you say to try and get that depth in terms of your thought and see how far you can go. It's important to note you're probably going to get to an I don't know point at somewhere in the interview. And that's good. I'm kind of looking to get you there, if I'm quite honest, because we don't know, quite how far you can go until we touch on those limits. And then we want to see how you can push past those. Do you know where you could go for more information? Are you able to take a moment, have a think, and see if you can puzzle something out? Listening to the interviewer, responding to our prompts to get further and deeper into your understanding than you ever have before. Interviews are tough. Don't get me wrong. I still remember mine, and they are over half a lifetime ago. But they are also a chance to really dive in deep. It was one of the most academically rewarding experiences that I've ever had. And I hope that that's not coloured by the fact that I did get in. But I remember coming out of my interviews and thinking I've never been pushed so hard in terms of my understanding before. I actually kind of enjoyed it. So go in with an open mind, go in ready to think on your feet, ready to engage in depth with some academics who geek out about your favourite subject just as much as you do, and to the extent that they have based their life's work and their career around just being an utter nerd in that subject in the best possible way. Go in there and enjoy being, together in that room, whether online or in person, and diving in deep into the subject you adore.
Thank you. Someone said, I want to answer, but I keep hitting the Slido word count. Thank you. That's really helpful for me to know, because I actually didn't know, or maybe I didn't remember that there was a word count. And it might also explain why a lot of your answers in the other ones were short, when we were saying you would probably elaborate on this and say why. So thank you. Word count is terrible.
We won't hold you to Slido word counts in interviews, don't worry.
Somebody else says word count is terrible. I second that. Oh, I'm sorry about that. That's helpful.
That's right. We will take that into account for future sessions. That's Slido's a new one for us, and we were seeing if it works. That's a good reason to say that maybe we'll look to replacing that one in the future. So thank you very much for the feedback. If someone's able to post in the Slido what the character or word limit is, please. Once you've hit it, that would be absolutely lovely to let us know.
It might say,
because we can use that for the
I
future.
might be able to work it out as well myself, but
Yeah.
if it says, oh, somebody says 160, is that 160 characters?
Characters or words?
I'm assuming it's characters, because words would be like a whole paragraph.
Yeah. While we do that, while that's going through, should we do some Q&A?
Yeah. So somebody said,
Let's get some questions in.
I'm going to find one from before that I put somewhere. Here it is. How do you thread the line between being critical and not coming across like a pessimist that you don't have an interest in the subject?
You can be so I think that it's very hard to be critical and actually not show an interest in the subject, because if you are not showing an interest, you'd be dismissive. But being critical, engaging with it in depth, trying to think your way around things, finding the flaws in arguments but finding the strengths in others, actually that shows an interest in the subject. I think the only way that you don't show the interest is if you're just being dismissive and trying to avoid the question or just brushing it off. Engaging in depth critically is exactly what I want to see. I want to see someone with an open mind, somebody who is willing to take on the information and think about it and possibly see the potential in it or the truth within it, but has a critical eye at the same time and just doesn't take it for granted because it's been presented to them by some so-called expert, or because someone's just immediately brought in the new and people jump onto that idea. But we need both. The critical eye without the open mind is the cynic. The open mind without the critical eye, gullible. We want someone who is between both extremes and able to bring those things together. Don't second guess yourself. Trust your thoughts, trust your interest in the subject. We can read that. There's so many different ways of showing it as well. Don't think you've got to be loud and brash and enthusiastic. Sometimes showing your love for a subject is quiet and simmering. It doesn't matter. You'll show that in your own way. Just focus on engaging with the questions that you've been asked and getting that depth of thought and understanding across. Good question.
There's another one which I think was asked quite a long time ago. It is, don't you have to pre-read something? So I wonder if it could be, maybe you can talk a little bit about pre-reading.
Only if we ask you to. So in some interviews, we might ask you to do something. In others, we might not. That depends on the interviewers and the types of questions that they want to ask. So yeah, it varies. What you will be told is if you've got to pre-read something, that will be in your interview details. So read the email in which says all the details about your interviews, including the format, the interview times. And we'll have the pre-reading in there in terms of what you might have to do. Just read all of that very carefully. If you're online, you'll have notification of when you need to pick that up and when, how long you'll have for it. If it's in person, you'll be told at what time you need to turn up to pick up something to read and how long you'll have for it in a very similar way. Don't expect to know what it is. We'll pick things that it's very likely you'll have no idea about on purpose because we want to see how well you deal with new information. We want to get everyone from a nice starting position of knowing relatively little to absolutely nothing about the topic that we're asking about. And then we want to see how you deal with the news. So again, we're not looking for knowledge here, but what we are looking for is your skills in terms of analysing new material. And the best way of preparing for this is talk to your teachers and get them to give you random bits of works within your subject and sources in history, some poems or excerpts of books in English to have a quick analyse in 15 minutes to half an hour. And you can get yourself confident in the skills of being able to pick apart a brand new text in a short amount of time and to think around some of the issues and the things that are in there.
And I just wanted to add to that, I guess even if your teacher can't do that, you can literally go to your school library or a library and just pick up a book and open it and do that as well. So it's pretty easy, and online as well. There's so much stuff you can access. Somebody just said, will the session recording be shared later? Yes, we'll be sharing all of the recordings at the end of the programme. And then there's some more questions for you, Sandy. So is there anywhere to check what types of interviews different colleges do?
College websites. Those will be updated shortly. Some of those decisions are still being taken by colleges at the moment, but they will declare whether or not whether they're going for in-person, online, or whether you might even have a choice between the two. So I would say around about May time is a good time to start double checking the college websites for that. And it'll usually be very clear whether they've updated it or not, just so there isn't any confusion. So if it's still saying, interviews in 2023 will be held via whatever, you know that the information for this year is still to come. But there's a lot of complex workings within a college that mean that information kind of comes out at slightly different paces. One of the quirks of the Cambridge system there, unfortunately.
Next question. Under what circumstances would an applicant not be interviewed? For instance, GCSE grades, assessment results, personal statement. Which is the most common reason?
So we look at applications holistically. Overall, we wouldn't interview someone if we think that they wouldn't be able to get a place compared to the strength of the gathered field. In law, the LNAT result might play a significant part in that, because that pre-interview assessment is done by all lawyers. A low performance in that would be something that absolutely could mean that we don't bring a student through to interview. But in other subjects where there isn't a pre-interview assessment like the LNAT, we typically be looking at a combination of predictions that are below the typical minimum offer for that subject, so an A star and 2 A's in most arts, humanities and social sciences cases, and also some GCSEs that indicate that actually might not be reachable by that student within that time. Colleges will be a little bit different in terms of how they do this, but that would sort of be the key thing. If the academic indicators say that someone is very unlikely to meet the offer that they would give, would be a reason that we might consider deselection. The other one, and by far the most common one, is somebody not having the prerequisite subjects for the course. So very common. Yeah, if you're applying for English, for example, and you haven't taken English literature or English language and literature at A level, we'd have to immediately deselect you because you don't meet the prerequisites for the course that have been stated. So it is just the case that we wouldn't be able to consider your application any further. Those are the most common ones. I've only ever seen a personal statement twice be a factor in deselecting an individual. One of those was because the rest of the application was very, very weak, and it was an architecture personal statement that when they were applying for economics, I think it was, so just completely off, and the rest of the application wasn't strong either. It fell into all the holes we saw before. And the other one was troubling. The sort of legally troubling that I can't talk about in this sort of call. That's the sort of level that a personal statement had to get to in order to be a factor in deselecting a student. Lindsay, I can tell you about that one offline.
Wow, yeah, I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, no, it was bad. And a teacher reference, again, I wouldn't hold a teacher reference against an applicant typically, because just because the teacher doesn't know exactly what we're looking for from a reference, that's not the applicant's fault. That would be unfair for me to deselect a student just on those grounds. So don't worry. Put this together the strongest application you can. Don't second guess that. And if you've got a good, strong application, if you're on for the sorts of grades we're looking for, then you're likely to be interviewed. And if you've got a pre-interview assessment, prepare for that heavily.
Question. Does the interviewer sometimes spice things up by trying different things on different students? For instance, a group of students would have to analyse a photo.
I mean, every interview is different anyway. I will often have sort of a few base questions which would remain the same throughout all of my interviews in a subject, so that I've got a good comparison point. I can compare how well someone's done with one question than another, but the route that a student will take through it is always going to be different based on their thoughts, their interests, the way that they're looking at the topic. There's enough spice in that in interviewing anyway, to be quite honest, because you're you and you're different to everybody else, and that's interesting and engaging and important. So yeah, I wouldn't want to go wild just for a couple of applicants, because that would mean that we're not getting a very fair and representative process going on. But I absolutely will be responding to individuals and coming up with interesting new ways of developing a question, or a nasty counter example I've just thought up for a specific individual, because I want to see how they respond to the idea of counter examples in general. And I'd be doing a different format of that with pretty much every person that I'm looking at. So yeah, I think it's just a case that all interviews are individual anyway, because you're all individual. And that's a good thing. If they were all the same, then it would be kind of dull for us, and it wouldn't really get to the point, would it?
What percentage of history applicants are interviewed?
Couldn't give you an absolute figure. There may be one on the departmental website on that. I would say between about 70 and 85 would probably be about average, but it can vary in a given year, depends on the strength of the field. Most is the answer, and again, don't worry about the odds. Yeah, have some confidence in your abilities. The odds are what they are. It shouldn't be the case that you're applying or doing things because you've got a better odds of getting in. You should be applying to the place that you want to get into and being confident enough to go for your desires on that, and confident enough for your abilities that you can really show how good you are and be that in that whatever percentage that gets an interview, an offer, a place.
Is there a possibility of not being interviewed for average GCSEs, but with all other areas being exceptional? For instance, would 2 to 3 5s at GCSE mean no interview at all?
Unlikely, because GCSEs are out of date by the time that you get to us. Basically, they'd be 3 years old at least. They're a mark of where you were. They show some of your academic potential, but I mean, I used to be a secondary school teacher. I know plenty of people who had decent to middling GCSEs and then kind of either grew up a little bit in the holidays or found A-level much more to their liking, have really started achieving. Make sure the teacher reference explains to us why there's been that jump in terms of the grades from the GCSEs to the predictions, and that can really help to strengthen an application. As well as that, we're not expecting everyone to be perfect at everything. If those 5s, let's say you're applying for English, if those 5s are in chemistry and physics, I kind of don't care, because they're not the most relevant subjects to that. I'm looking at your English grade. Have you got an 8 or a 9 in English language, English literature? So really, I'm not expecting polymaths. I want people to have some good GCSEs with some strong scores in the most relevant subjects. So if I'm seeing some 7s, 8s, and 9s in English, if you're applying for English, that's where I want you to be. I don't care about your art grade at that point. I have never deselected someone purely on the basis of GCSE grades. As well as that, there's also, if there's extenuating circumstances that have affected grades, we need to know about that. Whether somebody's, just come in to the UK and there's only been learning the language during the process, to illness or bereavement during exams. We're going to be looking at all of these things and taking them into consideration in a fair and human way.
There's a very relevant question that's come in. What would extenuating circumstances count as? GCSE level for prior question about extenuating circumstances. So I'm assuming that's the same person. We don't know because you send it in anonymously.
Yeah, basically, if you search Cambridge extenuating circumstances form, what that does, that form on that site is a form that you can fill in if there have been extenuating circumstances that have affected any part of your education so far. And that lets us know about it. It has to be signed off by a teacher or by a doctor, usually a teacher. And that means that we can put any, lower grades or challenges that you faced into context to make sure we're assessing an application fairly. So as you say, anything from bereavement to illness, family issues, whether someone's, been a refugee and come over to this country fairly recently, or just moved to this country fairly recently, immigrated, all sorts of things could be in there. That website gives you a full list of the sorts of things that are involved. And if in doubt, just let us know, because what we can't do is we can't, account for things that we don't know about. We can account for things that we do. And if we decide that it's relevant, we'll make sure that it's, properly assessed in our sort of holistic assessment of your application.
Thank you. There's currently no more questions. I don't know if we want to wait a minute or two just to see if any others come in, and after that we will end this session. If you don't have any more questions at this point, then you are free to go. Thank you so much for attending, and hopefully you found it helpful. If anyone does have any final questions, we'll be around for a minute or so, and then we will end this.
Thank you all for coming. I hope this has been a useful session. I hope that it's gotten rid of a few worries or answered any questions that you got. And a massive thank you to Lindsay as well, putting this whole thing together and this whole program, which is absolutely fantastic. Got to give her credit.
There's a final thank you. It's just a thank you.
You're very welcome.
It's always nice.
Lovely. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Yeah, I think we'll end here then. Thank you so much, and see you next time for the next one will be the STEM session, STEM interviews.
Thank you all. Thank you, Lindsay.
Goodbye.